Hey guys, this is John. Alright, this is a continuation of the Climbing the Rating Ladder series. I'm going to play individual games against certain opponents in various rating ranges, probably up to 2200. And I'm starting out with a player under 1000. NameUnused is my opponent. And we're just going to try to incorporate stuff that I talk about in the Chess Fundamentals series, in the Climbing the Rating Ladder series, and play solid, good, blunder-free chess and see what happens against my opponents. And I think this will be easier than posting very long videos. So these videos will hopefully be, 15 minutes in length. I think the time control, 5 minutes plus a 5-second increment will be good. And I'll try to make this a regular series. So I'm opening very solid against my opponent. He's choosing a kingside fianchetto. I think I'll just continue developing. Knight f6, preparing short castling. Note that I got my bishop outside the pawn chain. I will take this bishop and inflict doubled pawns on white. This is not terrible for them because they can hope to control the f-file later after castling. And my opponent's done a good job through 8 moves or so. He hasn't blundered anything. He is maybe making a couple too many pawn moves, especially with this a3 move. Rook pawn moves are moves that you see a lot at the lower levels, specifically a3 and h3, or for black, a6 and h6. You shouldn't make those too often. They should be for a very particular purpose if you make them at all. So here, because I'm castled and white is not, I'm thinking of playing d5 and breaking in the center. I could also develop my bishop, but I feel like this is a good time to play d5. Usually when your opponent's king is in the center and yours is already safe, castled, you can afford to play a little looser in the middle of the board and try to open lines. And the primary way to open lines in chess is by means of a pawn break. So attacking one of your opponent's pawns with your pawn. Okay, so knight takes e5. This is just a straight up blunder. White did not notice, or has miscalculated. They didn't notice that my knight could recapture here. And they would just be losing a piece for a pawn. Not enough. So I could also play knight takes e3 and go after the queen and the knight, but that gets a little messy after knight takes c6 in reply because white would be on my queen. So let's just take this. I'm happy to bank the piece. I don't see anything in particular that white can do to justify having given up that piece. Now white takes on d5. Fortunately, I have my queen defending. And take a note of the undefended pieces. Note that the rook on h1 is hanging right now, so I'm attacking it. He does block it with e4, attacking my queen. So I could play queen to d4, which stops him from castling and also attacks the b2 pawn. I like the look of that move. Yeah, let's do it. My opponent is talking about the Armenian genocide in the chat. I'm not sure what that has to do with the chess game. Maybe he's just trying to inform people. So queen d4, and he does cover the attack on the b2 pawn. Now, when you're ahead in material, the primary method for winning the game is simplification. And here I notice that if I play queen e3 check, I can either force my opponent to move their king, whereby I can play bishop h3 checkmate, or I can force them to block with their queen or their knight. And if they block with the queen, I like the fact that I can already trade down. I can trade the queens and get closer to an endgame where my material might matter even more. Other moves I would consider here would be just bishop g4 straight away, hitting the queen. That actually looks very strong because it's a developing move with tempo. Moreover, if the queen goes to d2, I'm now noticing that I have knight f3 check, forking the king and the queen. So I think I will play that move. Queen e3 looks also very good, but we haven't developed the bishop yet. Anytime you can bring a piece out with tempo, that's usually a good thing. And let's see what white does. Notice that white, we started with 5 minutes, and white, for a moment there, had more time than they started with, because there's a 5-second increment. Just poor time management, blitzing out the opening. I know that many of your opponents will do this, but don't fall into the trap of playing the opening as quick as they do. That's a recipe for disaster. You want to take your time. You want measured moves. And as I've said before in my videos, against good players, you can't think your way out of a bad position. So if you're hoping to save time for later in an effort to, spend time after you've already inflicted some damage on your own position, that's not a good strategy. You want to spend your time proactively. So white avoided knight f3 check with the fork on the king and the queen at least. I can still play this move, and I might do that because I can just see where the king goes. f1 is the safest, if the king goes to e2 or d1, I'll have some discovered attacks. So let's throw that in. I might be also looking to get my rooks to the center, maybe play another pawn break, f5. If I play f5, that would create a clash with that pawn on e4, and maybe I can get my rook working down the f-file. Yeah, and to White's credit, they are playing a couple accurate moves, like queen c1 and now king f1, avoiding discoveries. Got to look at our forcing moves, so I see I could play bishop to h3 check, king e2, maybe bishop g2 then, chasing the rook. It looks a little murky to me. I kind of like f5, just getting my my rook into the action. Granted, White could play king g2, but still I think f5 is a good move. So I'm going to go ahead and play it. So our rook opposing White's king on the file is hoping to do some damage. And I'm getting a little lowish on time, 2 minutes. Hopefully that won't be a theme of this series. John getting down on time and trying desperately to make it up. Okay, and now with knight e2, you might think, what has changed since the last position? And if you want to pause your video and try to figure that out, I want to make another calculation, the same calculation that I made on the previous move, but since White didn't move their king to g2 as I thought they might, what can I do now? And again, pause your video if you'd like to figure that out. Okay, so the answer is I can play bishop h3, and it's checkmate. Notice that White took away the flight square from their own king, so they're stopping their king from coming to e2 by virtue of having played this knight move. So we can revisit that bishop h3 check. I didn't play it on the previous move because I saw that White could escape to e2. That's still good for Black, but I just didn't want to have to think about what to do with my knight then. So as soon as White took away the flight square, bishop h3 is now working beautifully. Checkmate. Okay, so, you know, in this series, there's going to be big rating mismatches. There's no doubt about that. The point of this series is not to see, you know, how many wins I can rack up against lower-rated players. The point of this series is to try to illustrate typical mistakes that happen at the various rating levels. And I hope that you guys will see many of the mistakes that you make in your own games reflected in the play of my opponents. So, analyzing this game against NameUnused, so they opened with e4, followed by knight f3. I also recommend this for White to beginning players. If you're watching this video, you might be in the lower rating echelons, and you should be playing straightforward chess, trying to develop your pieces quickly at the outset of the game, control the center, and castle. Those are the three main principles of the opening. So you want to hit those check boxes. And I don't particularly like g3. If you're in the lower rating categories, I wouldn't mess around with fianchettos too often. A fianchetto is when you move your knight pawn and then bring your bishop to the second rank, or if you're Black, the 7th rank square. Like a fianchetto here for Black would be this, or on the queen side, maybe b6 and bishop b7. It's not that the fianchetto is bad, it's that it's time consuming. Like, you have to play a pawn move to develop your bishop. And I think you're going to do better when you just develop your bishop the conventional way. So here, White could play bishop c4, the Italian game, or bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez. I think for beginning players, both of those options are better. Just, you know, make pawn moves only to facilitate your piece development. Don't worry about fancy stuff like fianchettos. You might see it in Grandmaster games. It's not really worth it at your level. Not that you can never do it, but don't willingly do it. So here, I play bishop c5. I could also play knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4 with tempo. That would be a plenty fine move as well. With bishop c5, you actually kind of have to be concerned about knight takes e5, which is the so-called center fork trick. White's idea would be that after knight takes knight, they have d4, forking these two pieces. I think this would be okay, given that White has already fallen behind in development. And I didn't calculate this line, but actually I could play bishop takes d4, should this crop up. And what would happen if White recaptures with their queen? You might want to pause your video and figure that out. So if White replies with queen takes d4 here, what is my plan? Okay, so the answer would be knight f3 check, forking the king and the queen. And again, I didn't calculate that during the game, but that's a possible side defect of g3 is that they weaken the f3 square. There's no pawn defending that square anymore. So if White were to try this so-called center fork trick, it would backfire on them had I found this line. So let's return to the game. So I got the bishop out. You should be very conscious of how you coordinate your pieces in the opening. I talked about this in the second chess fundamentals video as well on coordination. So you want to have your pawn moves complement your piece development and vice versa. So the fact that I play d6 now only after the bishop is liberated from the chain, it's an important point. It's a minor one, but many people as black may play like d6 right here, but that blocks in the bishop unnecessarily. Better to develop the bishop out first and then play the pawn move, so your bishop has more scope. So bishop g2, I just developed, knight f6. White played bishop e3. I took the bishop. So now white has doubled pawns. Doubled pawns are not the end of the world. If you accept doubled pawns in your game or you have to take them on unwillingly, don't panic. Of the major pawn structures, doubled pawns tend to be the least effective compared to like isolated pawns or backward pawns. They do yield open files. So here, for instance, white doesn't have a pawn on the f file, so that's a semi-open file. So after I castle, here white just started to play some suboptimal moves. They still have basic things they can check off their list of opening goals, right? We talked about developing your pieces, controlling the center, and castling. And at least two of those goals, developing the pieces and castling, have so far gone unfulfilled for white. You could say that they're controlling the center pretty well. I mean, we both have a pawn in the middle. This pawn on e3 actually controls some useful territory, particularly d4. But there's still two major goals that white has to accomplish here. And they could accomplish one of them just by castling right now. I think that would be a good move and a good reaction to what I just did, castling as well. But a3 doesn't fit with white's plan. If they were worried about my knight coming to b4, then they're mistaken, because I wouldn't play knight b4. Let's say white had castled. You know, if you're white, are you really worried about this knight venturing into your position? I know sometimes your opponent's minor pieces coming into your half of the board early on is a concern, but here white could just play a3 if they wanted to now, and this time they would be doing it with a gain of tempo. This knight doesn't have anywhere to go except straight backwards to one of these squares. I would just be losing time as black. I can't take this pawn, it's guarded by the queen. This pawn is also guarded. So if white was playing a3 in an attempt to discourage knight b4 or prevent that move, then that was mistaken. I wasn't going to go for that anyways. If they were to make a rook pawn move, I could understand h3 maybe being more useful, because that way they're stopping me from bringing my bishop into the game with tempo. But even still, I would not make that move. I think white has to focus more so on development and getting their king to safety. So castles, or maybe knight c3 or knight bd2, developing the last minor piece. One of those moves is preferable. So after a3 is played, even though I have one piece that remains to be developed, I thought this was a good time to strike in the center. I wouldn't fault you at all if your instinct was to go bishop e6 or bishop g4 here, but given that white has played slowly and their king is still in the center and mine is nicely tucked away, I think it's a good time to play a pawn break move, opening the center. Basically with d5, I'm saying I want to raise the stakes while your king is the one on the chopping block, not mine. If too many lines open up in the center, white's king is going to be the target, not this black king that's already tucked away on g8. That's the virtue of castling. You get your king to safety very quickly. Also, your rook can join in the attack. So d5. Now I'm creating a double attack on e4. I have my pawn and my knight attacking there. White took. Might be safer to play a move like knight c3 or knight bd2, developing and adding a defender. We like multi-purpose moves. I've talked about this in many of my videos too, but anytime you can make a move that accomplishes a dual purpose, you should think heavily about that. You should give that some serious thought, because it could be good. And with a move like, let's say, knight c3, white is developing a piece and defending. They're defending an attacked pawn. So granted, I could take and they might end up having double isolated pawns, but this would be better than what happened in the game. Because as you saw, after I was able to take on d5, and especially here when white blundered, their game just went rapidly downhill. E takes d5 is not a bad move. I shouldn't suggest that that's a mistake or anything, but after knight takes d5, white must make a defensive move. Here I'm threatening knight takes e3, so probably a move with the queen is best. Maybe queen e2, just plopping the queen right in front of the king, defending the pawn. And if I'm white and playing queen e2, I'd be looking to get my king to safety as soon as possible. I really want to castle. I don't want to stick around in the center any longer. Instead, though, they blundered. They played knight takes e5. So grabbing a pawn in the center, and that was ill-conceived. White just forgot or didn't realize that my knight was going to take. Maybe they got carried away with the attack on d5 and didn't realize also that my queen is defending. Just a combination that backfires for white. And white played this move very quickly. I'm on the old version of chess.com. It doesn't show how much time elapsed per move, but white played this move almost instantly. So, yeah, knight takes e5. I took. So we're up 2 points of material now. White took here, and we've got our queen backing it up. And here white did realize that the rook is under attack. So they did play e4, attacking the queen. Queen d4. Here I'm stopping white from castling. I'm also attacking the pawn here. Multi-purpose move. In addition, queen e3 check could be annoying. White defended against the attack on b2 with knight c3. And I like this move, bishop g4, developing the bishop with tempo, with a gain of time. This is our remaining piece to be brought into the action, aside from our rooks. And we connect our rooks in the process of playing this move. White played queen c1. Had they played queen d2, they were going to blunder into the fork, knight f3 check. So queen d2 is good. Here I was able to disturb white's king position, knight f3 check. They moved here. Had they gone to e2 or d1, they'd be looking at discovered attacks from the knight. So accurately played by white here. And here I went f5. I thought for a second about check. I was talking about this continuation, forcing the king back into the center. This knight is attacked. I'm sure there's good moves here, like bishop g2. Attacking the rook and defending the knight comes to mind. But at the same time, f5 seems like a coherent move, introducing the rook down the f-file. And white immediately lost the game with their next move, but it is difficult. The damage has already been done. And for those of you who are sub 1,000 or even 1,000 to 1,500, the thing I repeat over and over again is you got to get a handle on your blunders. It's very hard to improve in chess when you're capable of just blundering something as big as a piece on any given move. And that's what white did with knight takes e5 on move 10. Against a good player, you're not gonna survive after that. They're just gonna put you away with no chance of you getting back in the action. Only a slim chance, maybe. So the damage has already been done. And even if you're thinking, well, I'm a lot lower rated than you, John, if I blunder a piece, then I can still get back in the game, or vice versa. If my opponent blunders a piece, it's not a guarantee that I'll put them away. Well, that's true, but I think people underestimate how much these little blunders make a difference in the game. I mean, if you could reduce the frequency of your blunders by one move per game, if you give away one less pawn or one less piece per game, just imagine how your results will improve. You'll probably gain like 100 rating points, in your next like 20 games. It makes that big of a difference. And those blunders, even those pawn blunders, they really add up. You got to get a handle on that first and foremost if you want to improve in chess. So, yeah, knight e2, and now after this, the king's flight square was taken away, and I could deliver checkmate with bishop h3. So I just reassessed that continuation. So a short game, only 16 moves, but I think we saw a couple errors that you'll see often at this rating level. So to kind of summarize ways I think white could improve here, I wouldn't go for fianchettos. I wouldn't mess with that if you're sub 1,000 for sure. Even like sub 1,500, I wouldn't do that too often. Also, these rook pawn moves, these kind of wasteful and pointless rook pawn moves like a3, that doesn't fit in with anything white has done so far. All their other moves have been in the center or on the king side, so why suddenly play a rook pawn move? The only purpose I could think about for that would be to discourage knight b4 or maybe to push pawn b4, but that's so outside of what white would normally just want to accomplish here, completing their development and castling, that it cannot be recommended. You're better off sticking to the fundamentals. So that encouraged me to break in the center, and this was the big blunder of the game. Knight takes e5. Much bigger of a mistake than a3 because this leads to a 2-point material loss. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll be playing players in all sorts of rating ranges, so look forward to those videos as well. Talk to you guys later. Bye.